Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Get Smart, Get Started, and Get Funded. I will be your host today, Evan Hill. I am probably a familiar face by now. I'm a product marketing manager here on the Trimble team. Before I introduce our guests, I want to give you just a high-level overview of what we're going to talk about today, and then a couple of quick administrative housekeeping items before we dive in. So right off the bat, obviously this whole concept of a bipartisan infrastructure bill passed on November 15th, been a hot topic not only in the construction industry, but frankly, American life and politics as a whole. This has been pretty much the dominating news topic of the past six to 9 months in America, frankly. This was one of the driving legislative goals for President Biden's campaign last year. Over the past couple of years, this has been a concept that everybody is talking about, not just within the industry, but outside the industry as well. So for the past couple of months, we've been talking about if it's going to get passed, what it's going to look like if it gets passed. We're finally past that moment. It is finally signed into law, like I said, on November 15th. And this is big news for your 22 budget and planning. While some of these funds have been allocated on predetermined formulas and calculations, a vast majority of these funds are up for grabs for local agencies, cities, states, everybody who is most focused on revitalizing America's aging infrastructure. Depending on what measure you use or what report or think tank you listen to or read from, everybody is pretty much in universal agreement that America's infrastructure has been aging for several decades now. In terms of federal spending, it's actually been on a decline since the 1960s. So this is really, this bill, a once in a lifetime opportunity, not only for the industry, frankly, but for our country as a whole. This is going to affect our economy, our way of life, literally like your next door neighbor, how they get to work, how they're able to get to sports games. It affects rail, transportation, water infrastructure, bridges, the list goes on and on and on. So that is what we're going to be talking about today, how you can position yourself as a capital program owner to be in a best position to receive those funds. With that background in mind, I'm going to open us up with just a couple of administrative items, and then I will introduce our guests, I promise. So number one, this webinar will be available on demand after the fact on the eBuilder website. So it will be under the resources tab. You can access that on demand, send it to a colleague if you need to drop halfway through, or etc. It will be available to you. The second item is there will be a certificate of completion mailed to your email in case you need it for your manager or a work participation program. The third item is super critical. We do have an open Q&A throughout this session. So many webinars you may attend are very sort of like presentation format and you stare at a screen and just learn a ton. That is not going to be how we do today. Today is going to be very conversational in nature, in format, and frankly, we want to engage with you in the audience. So if you're
hopefully they still learn a ton, Evan.
What was that?
I said hopefully they still learn a ton.
Well, hopefully they still learn a ton, but hopefully they're not staring at words on a screen for 35 minutes straight. If you look at your screen on the right side of the tab, you will see a questions tab. Feel free to drop your questions there in real time, and we will get to those at the end of the show. We're going to leave about 10 to 15 minutes for it. I'm going to try to keep us on track. And with that said, I'm going to finally stop talking. Let me introduce our guests, Matt Sprague, Senior Product Marketing Manager, and Chris Bell. Chris, you have a fancy new title now, actually. Can you tell us about yourself and your title? I'll start off with you.
Sure. Thanks, Evan. My name is Chris Bell, and I work as a vice president within the Trimble organization. And my big areas of focus are infrastructure, as well as data and analytics.
Matt, how about you?
So like you mentioned, I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Trimble PPM, which is our project and program management division. So that includes eBuilder, as well as our contractor tool, which is Project Site. I have been intimately involved for, like you said, probably the past 9 months around the what was the was the AJP and is now the IIJA for really cross-divisional efforts as well as cross-sector efforts throughout Trimble.
Great. Well, thank you both for joining today's show. We know you're both super busy. So we're going to dive right in with a question. And Chris, it's actually going to be geared towards you. But before I do, I just want to set the stage. A lot of people have been asking, this is $1.2 trillion, but where is this money going? Just a quick little high level overview here. 110 billion for roads, bridges, and other major projects, 50 billion for bridge repair, 50 billion for public transport, 65 billion for freight rail and passenger rail, another 65 billion for broadband upgrades, another for water infrastructure. There's 30 billion for environmental restoration projects, 25 billion for airports. The list goes on and on and on. It is truly comprehensive. So Chris, this first question for you has been something we've been has come up, frankly, in a lot of conversations with prospects and customers. Now that this bill is passed, when can agencies, state and federal groups, et cetera, if you're a capital program owner, when can you expect funding from the IIJA to start flowing in support of their projects?
Sure, thanks, Evan. So there's a couple of ways. The bottom line on top on this is expected to be the first quarter of 2022. So that's the short answer, but let me use a little bit of a precedence to give you a better understanding of the flow. So one of the best ways to look at that is if you're an infrastructure owner, there's some funds that are already flowing. It may not be called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but there are two funding mechanisms that already started to flow, and that's setting a timing precedence for IIJA. So let's unpack that. The first one is the ARPA fund, which is the American Rescue Plan Act. That funded $1.9 trillion of emergency relief funds, and that process was primarily for the care, COVID response, and other things that were needed, but it did have set-asides specifically to infrastructure. So ARPA began to introduce funding in the areas of water, wastewater, and broadband infrastructure. So there was a funding mechanism that was already in place, that is in place now, that is available for owners to beef up their infrastructure. There's also the FAST Act, which is Fixing America's Surface Transportation. That's a reauthorization. And what that did was extend an existing act, and that happened this year for $476 billion, primarily in the areas of roads and bridges. Now, depending upon what area you're working on, the funding mechanisms will go through different agencies, but the timing is probably right. So if we went back and looked at ARPA as an example, what we found is that ARPA actually went to another funding mechanism at the state level. So it was authorized at ARPA, then it went to a state, which is the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Agency, and then it flowed to regional municipalities, counties, and others. That process from start to finish basically started in March. It was signed, and then the guidance was established in May of 2021. Then requests were offered. So 2-month process from signing to the availability to make requests was about a 2-month time frame for the first tranche is what they called it. So then second levels of tranches happened in June. So there was one tranche that went through in May, then another one that went in June, and the money is flowing. Now that particular regulation actually has a deadline. So municipalities have to have obligated the money by 2024, by the end of 2024. And right now, those funds are underutilized and under obligated. However, we are seeing infrastructure owners, local counties, municipalities, streets and roads divisions to release projects. So If we use that as a precedence, IIJA money is expected to flow Q1 of 2021 or 2022, and the first one would be the requesting process. That's what you can expect to see. I do want to give you just a quick proof point on that. As an example of that fund, Chicago Transit Authority, as an example, just released a whole set of new projects that upgraded their the L train terminals to get more accessibility for handicap access. So that's an example of ARPA money that took a while to just flow, and now projects are beginning released. And we would expect to see that with IIJA.
Matt, do you want to add anything there? Should owners wait to position themselves for this money, or should they start acting now?
They should definitely start acting now. So there's a couple different things I'd like to mention here. So first, I found a great resource that maybe you know about, maybe you don't. But essentially, it is if you Google White House fact sheet infrastructure per state. So there's probably a lesser Google search than that, but that's what I put in to find this. And there's actually, right from the White House website, a breakdown per state on what are the expected funds distribution. So this would be the non-grant related funding distribution that would come into each state, and how it's even broken down within each state. So I highly recommend, if you haven't seen that, to get a good idea of how much money that can be expected depending on what state you're coming from. And when you look at how the money is going to flow, there's a bifurcation kind of at the beginning, which is considered formulaic funding versus grant programs. So the formulaic funding it's pretty much already been determined, and you'll start to see that money go out within the next 6 months, and that's going to be some of the ones that are the backlog projects that are shovel ready, ready to literally hit the ground running. And they're going to go through. The formulaic ones are going to kind of go through old programs, right? So there's a litany of all of the old mechanisms of which you're accustomed to receiving your funding from. So as an example, the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. So the IIJA is actually going to pour in just under $12 billion each year to fund that fund even more. And then in addition, additional new investment will be specific to the lead service line replacement, which is an additional $15 billion on top of that. But those are coming from existing older programs. And then there are the newer programs that are going to be coming in place. So the promoting resilient operations for transformative efficiency and cost savings transportation. I had to read that because I couldn't memorize that one, but it's a simple one. It's PROTECT, P-R-O-T-E-C-T program. That's providing like $7.3 billion in formula funding. But then there's an additional $1.4 billion in the competitive grant funding. So now there's all of those two kind of bifurcations in terms of the formulaic and the grant and the old programs versus the new programs. But definitely the older programs, the money will flow quicker, just because the processes put in place in order to move that money are already in place. They don't have to create those policies and procedures.
That's great. Matt, I've got a follow-up question for you, and it's a little bit of a hot button topic, you could say. We're going to jump around a little bit, but I think this is important to talk about. There was all this debate over the past several months about how much should we spend on infrastructure? What is the right number? Well, that debate is over now. It's 1.2 trillion bare minimum. There might be more with the Build Back Better Act and the pending bills to remain, but there's going to be, I think there's going to be a heightened level of, I think, eyeballs, scrutiny, accountability, focus on transparency fiscally that comes with a spending bill and a price tag this large. What can local, federal, state agencies do to ensure organizationally that they are being strong financial stewards of American tax dollars? So that's a big question, but I'm going to throw you away.
It's a long question, Evan. But really, when it comes down to those two hot button words, the transparency and accountability. So kind of roll it back for a second and think about why. This bill took a long time to pass, and there was not violent agreement across the aisle in order to get this thing done. It was representatives, that had to make concessions, and they had to take risks with their constituents. So therefore, they're going to expect results. They're going to expect to see metrics that show the early indicators of that, of the success of the bill and the funding. Therefore, not having systems in place that are designed to find efficiencies, to create accountability, and to make all of this transparent to the stakeholders is really not going to be an option. So I was thinking this, like you wouldn't award a shipping contract that hauls with horse and buggies. This is a similar concept. The old ways of doing things are not good enough, and those that are not innovating will be positioned, or those rather that are innovating, will be positioned to be awarded more now and into the future. So you got to make sure that you have systems in place that allow you to create the efficiencies, but to drive the accountability and to create the transparency across all the stakeholders within that project that you're working on.
Chris, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I would just add, if you actually, break open the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that Matt and I both did, you'll actually find language that is setting an expectation of transparency. There are value areas that they expect, specifically around maximizing interoperability, boosting productivity, managing complexity, reduce delays and cost overruns, and enhance safety and quality. So definitely, while all the terms and mechanisms of exactly what is the reporting structure, what is the funding tracking and responsibilities that owners will have, will evolve over time as those things get defined and the funds get distributed. But, it is our position that it is very likely that organizations like the Government Accountability Office, like the Office of Management and Budget, are very likely to set some expectations for transparency as to where those funds are, and other agencies will have expectations on those value areas that I just described on productivity and reduction of cost delay and schedule overrun.
Perfect. So Chris, I'm actually going to follow up with you with a similar question that was specifically requested that we actually talk about it in this webinar. It's another hot button topic. It is the labor shortage that is affecting multiple industries, not just the construction industry in America. With this massive injection of federal funds and the pending, beginning of new infrastructure projects, I guess skilled labor and labor in general is a real problem in the GC community right now. What do owners need to do to ensure that these projects begin on time?
Yeah, so you can imagine, for somebody that's in the category, an owner in water or wastewater or an airport or roads and bridges, your project portfolio and capital improvement program can dramatically increase. This isn't a little increase. This could be a force multiplier in your organization. You could literally double to triple or more your ongoing capital improvement program budget that you're managing. Right, so all of that has to get executed as projects, and you have to think about the bill. Of course, the bill is to create a more resilient infrastructure for America, right? Of course, we need that, but it also has a side economic impact of job creation. And that's really important to get Americans back to work. And to do that, they have to go execute the work. But where's the labor? The reality is the demand will exceed capacity. There is a labor shortage. It's been around for many, many, many years. On top of a graying workforce in construction, it's been hard to attract new talent into the industry. So it is causing a crisis of labor, and great organizations like the AGC and ABC are doing something about it. So they are doing all kinds of recruiting efforts to bring labor into the market to deliver these projects. But Evan, your key point in the question is, what's the impact to an owner, right? So let me just bring a little bit of data to the table on that. So according to the Dodge Construction Outlook Conference, where they revealed, the new data, this is one of the key problem areas that owners will face. It's literally the #1 issue of pricing and supply chain related issues. So material availability for their project and labor shortages will remain an issue over the next several years. So the impact to an owner. So if you just went back pre-COVID, from bid award conference, so when you bring them all in and you award the conference, from that time to breaking ground took an average of about a month and a half to 2 months. It wasn't all that long from award to get started. Here's the reality now. It's almost shocking. 6 to 9 months is now the average cycle from award to breaking ground. It's a dramatic increase in lead time. And so what does that force an owner to think about? Is you have to think about what are your prioritized programs. And we have spoken with many, many owners all across the United States, and we find that there's 2 clear buckets of owner behavior. One, which is proactive, on planning, we're laying out our CIP, we are prioritizing our projects, and we're getting ready to submit what projects are going to get funded through IIJA. They're just leaning into the whole process. And then a vast majority of owners that we talk to are actually in even keel mode. And I would argue this is a dangerous position for you to be in if you're in even keel mode, because you're just waiting for something to happen. And what that's going to do is expose you to the scarcity of resources out in the marketplace, right? So if you want to deliver projects, the projects that are going to get funded are the ones that create jobs today. And so you have to think about what projects you want to get funded and how can you start your RFI process in getting information from your prospective contractors so that they can plan labor and they can plan ahead to start your project when you want to start your project. So long lead times for sure.
Matt, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, so I would just kind of layer on a little bit, going back to the beginning so from your question in the beginning of Chris's response. A lot's been focused on the construction laborers, but there's many more in terms of laborers that need to be accounted for. So that there are budget experts, there are obviously the various construction workers and skilled tradespeople, but there's conservationists and environmental engineers, and by the way, how do you hire all those people? You probably need to expand your human resources department, in order to make all of those hires. So there's so much institutional infrastructure that needs to be created in order for us to do these infrastructure jobs. So there was a great quote that I read from a woman named Ellery Monks, who's the co-founder of the Atlas Marketplace. And she said, if the nation wants generational impacts, we can't afford to overlook operational capacity. And she was somewhat of a critic of the IIJA in that it's missing the labor part of it. And so unfortunately, we're speaking to the owners today that's fallen on your plate, that you need to figure out ways to make it work and be successful with these. And so a lot of it is human resources, but then there's also the technology side. We'd be remiss if we didn't bring that up today.
Yeah, and actually that's a perfect setup for the next question I want to ask you, Matt, is knowing that we do have a labor shortage and owners are being forced to do more with less resources. What sorts of systems, tools, processes, procedures should owners position themselves to have in place beginning on these new projects in 2022? And the one question I do want to throw in there as a sort of follow-up is we have several questions about this concept of an advanced digital construction management system. There's some not rumors, actually, it's fact now that there's money allocated in the IIJA for those types of technology systems. So Matt, do you want to tackle those two questions of how can owners best position themselves from a systems technology perspective, and then talk a little bit about those specific allocated funds?
Yeah, so I believe the IIJA indirectly addresses the labor issue in that it's promoting the use of technology to try to essentially promote doing more with the same amount of resources. So essentially the idea is that, how efficient can we start to be? Can we start to, reduce the amount of time it takes to execute a project so we can do more of the projects? And we're not talking about a 1-year time frame. We're talking about 5, 10, 15-year time frame. This isn't a short fix problem, our infrastructure. This is a long-term, like I said, a generational type of implementation. So you mentioned the advanced digital construction management systems. It's a mouthful. There's no clever way of talking about that, like protect, like I said earlier. But this one is actually in the bill. So it's section 13006 in the bill, which is the research and technology development and deployment subsection, or whatever, however you want to call it. But really, they start to define the advanced digital construction management system. So essentially within a technology and innovation deployment program. And really what they're going to really, and I'm not making this up, right? This is coming right from the text. So you can go to the IIJA, Control F, Advanced Digital, and you'll come to section 130006. And what this whole program is designed to do is to promote, implement, deploy, demonstrate, showcase, support, and document how we can how we can utilize technology across multiple phases of a construction project lifecycle. So we're talking about engineering, design, building, construction, as well as then asset operation and maintenance. So the goals of the advanced digital construction management systems, specifically in the context of design, build, and operate, are interoperability. So how well can we share and use data and break down? We all hear this, right? That we all have these point solutions that create silos of data. So how well can we start to adopt technology that breaks down those silos and allows that data to actually be utilized to solve problems and create insights? Which would obviously boost productivity, help manage complexity, reduce delays and overruns, just as a couple of examples on those. And it's not really just about what technology can bring to it, but it's also how you can leverage vendors and consultants to help bring the knowledge and the know-how into these projects. So what are the best practices? What are the connected workflows that can be leveraged? As I mentioned before, how do you get that interoperability? That's one of the goals, to actually work. How do we get the data out of those silos? And really, can we also provide advanced training? So we essentially teach how to fish, so to speak, so that over the course of all of these projects, there can be a higher level of success and a higher level of efficiency, and therefore a higher level of accountability, so that those representatives are happy that they voted for the bill at the end of the day.
Chris, I'll give you the final word before we jump into a couple of questions.
Oh my goodness. I mean, Matt, like as I listen to you, the impact still hits me. It's the real life scenario, right, that we're asking owners to really take on. You summed it up in a key word. You said to do more with the same, right? So that's literally the life that owners will have over the next couple of years. A massive increase in the size and complexity of their projects, right? So that unaffordable project that has always been in the background that you've wanted to go do, but it's just been too expensive for the budget that you have, is now viable, right? It's economically viable. So you're going to increase complexity. And then the other side is you're just going to have a whole bunch of other projects, AKA Chicago Transit Authority that just released a whole bunch of train station upgrades for ADA compliance, right? So both the volume of or the complexity of a project and volume of projects are going to go up. Are you going to double your staff overnight? Nope. It's too hard to find the talent in your organization to bring those people, because the very same PMs you want to hire, the engineering and construction management firms are going to want to hire too, right? So you're competing for similar resources. So that forces the need for digital transformation of owner organizations. They're going to need to look at their digital technologies to look for that productivity boost in their organization so that they actually can do more with the same. And so the impact is big. And the thing that I was thinking about, Matt, as you were describing this, is that even if you have an existing capital improvement program management system in place, or some people still call it a project management information system, or PMIS, even if you have one of those systems in, you're going to want to improve the efficiency, the effectiveness, the impact of those systems. And literally $100 million is set aside in advanced digital construction systems clause in this bill to help fund that. And it's not just for the tech purchase, it's for implementation, it's for interoperability, integration, it's for training and success of using those solutions so that they make an impact in productivity in your organization and reduce cost and schedule risk for your projects. So it's really nice to me that this bill had the foresight to think about what enabling processes and technology are needed in order to allow owners to bear the burden of increased project work.
Yeah, and to kind of put their money where, well, they put their money where their mouth was, but also to put something in place to ensure this is going to happen. There was an executive order, and I can't remember it, within the past month that got passed after the passing of this bill, that created a task force that is specifically set up to make sure that programs like this one are actually being executed on. So it's not like a set it and forget it type of scenario within the government. That there is actually a task force put together, and yeah, you can Google that one too. You can kind of put in the IIJA task force, and there's a fact sheet on the whitehouse.gov to get there.
Perfect. Well, hey guys, we have actually an insane amount of questions that have come in like the last 5 to 10 minutes. So we're going to try and jump through some of these. I actually don't think we're going to be able to get through all of them. They're a little bit technical in nature, so hopefully we can answer most of them. Chris, I'm going to throw it your way for at least this first one, potentially the second too. Can ARPA funding be used as a match for other federally funded projects?
Yeah, so the ARPA regulations themselves have certain set-asides for a particular type of project. So it is not as broad reaching as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, right? So ARPA at that volume has really been focused on the funding bills that we would have gotten just as an individual taxpayer, COVID relief and others. But specifically, if you're in the area of water and wastewater or broadband infrastructure, there are specific rules and regs that do define funding mechanisms in those areas. So it depends on the infrastructure that you're building.
Sorry for throwing you a curveball. I didn't know if you were going to be able to answer that, but it was the first one that came in. Matt, I will give you the next one. Will funding be sent as block grants to municipalities, or will this become a grant writing exercise, and in parentheses, with grant writers and staff we don't have?
So the answer is yes and no. So there are the non-grant formulaic funding that'll come through the normal funding avenues that your agency participates in. What the requirements are to get that, I'm not that level of an expert. So, and I'm certainly not an expert at every single state level. But then, yes, there are grant programs that are there that, yes, you will need to find out who you need to position yourself for these grants with, where they're gone through. Chris, you had mentioned in a conversation we had, there's a great website for this. I can't remember what.
There is. So because of an initiative, this is actually a good number of years ago, was to set up a process of centralizing the available grant opportunities and to streamline the submission process for grants. So I can't speak to, does that mean you need a grant writer? Would one on staff or contracted within your organization, would that benefit you? Yes, it would. However, if you go to grants.gov, that's going to give you access to the available grants today. You will find many of the grant opportunities that exist under ARPA already there on grants.gov. You will start to see the flow of opportunities from IIJA there. They're not all there yet, but that will start to happen in Q1 of 2022. So for those that do have grant writing capabilities within their organization, you might be at an advantage, both in speed and coverage of grant opportunities. And if you don't have that resource, sometimes you can rely upon. It might be as simple as teaming up with your vendors and finding out if that's sometimes it's just a cost proposal that you need to submit. So it doesn't have to be as rigorous as we imagine.
Chris, I'll give you the final question. Do projects, and this comes from Veronica, do projects have to be shovel ready to be a recipient of these federal funds, or can we apply for these funds without the project being shovel ready, basically?
Yeah, so no, you don't have to be shovel ready, because let's face it, especially on infrastructure, it's going to be heavy engineering design requirement. So what's happening today, right? Proactive infrastructure owners are accelerating their design phase activities right now to get them procurement ready, right? So procurement ready, obviously a step before shovel ready. So no, they don't have to be shovel ready. Is it an advantage to have shovel ready projects for job creation? Sure, it would be. I don't know that there's like some formula of this project is approved or versus that project is approved, because of how Matt described the formulaic process as opposed to the grant process. But no, it doesn't have to be shovel ready, and it's good to submit shovel ready projects too.
Yeah, and just to add on a little bit there, speaking with some of the owners that we work with, the kind of the process that they're going through, have been going through, and are continuing to go through is to have the conversations with the organizations that handle this funding. It's obviously much larger and complicated depending on the size of your state, but if you follow the money going from federal to state agency, maybe to regional agency to county agency, whatever that flow is, each of those steps can start to create prerequisites that the money needs to be used for a litany of different reasons. So the recommendation is to if you haven't already, to reach out to them and say, the programs that you are going to be putting in place, what will get us the money in the next 6 months? What will get it? What are the programs that'll help us get the money for 2023, 2024, so on and so forth? And they very well may start to create criteria to say, listen, we are going, and I'm making this up right now, but it's most likely a very good chance. We are going to fund the projects first that create the most amount of jobs. That could be that is an example of one, and that could range from road maintenance to creating a new bridge, or not creating a new bridge, but updating a bridge. I guess you could create a new bridge.
Well, hey, I told the entire audience that we were going to stick to 30 minutes, and I acknowledge that I failed miserably, but the conversation was just too good to stop us, so I'm not going to apologize. Chris Bell, Matt Sprague, thank you so much for this conversation today. We obviously have a ton of capital owners in the audience today, and we hope this conversation positioned your organization to be in the best possible position to be a recipient of these federal funds. Again, this is truly like a once in a lifetime opportunity, not just for this industry, but for America. This is about building a better America. This is about building a more viable America, building a more competitive America, and ultimately revitalizing America's infrastructure. So get smart, get started, and get funded. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in today. One last thing just before we go, I did drop a link in the chat. You'll see it, e-builder.net/infrastructure. You guys can visit that webpage to learn all about how eBuilder and Trimble as a whole is partnering with federal, state, local agencies to help rebuild America's infrastructure. So feel free to bookmark that link. It's super useful. Got a ton of resources on there that I think you might benefit from. But with that said, thank you so much, folks, for attending today. You will receive a link to this recording in your email. But with that said, enjoy the rest of your week and be safe, and we'll see you guys next time.